Thank you, Jenny. Can you all hear me? Let me start with an invocation from the Upanishads, and then we'll take it from there. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Namaste, everybody. And I won't say good morning or good afternoon because I know it's a worldwide audience, and such things have sort of become irrelevant now. Yes, the spirit of the Upanishads. I'm really grateful to the Theosophical Society in the United Kingdom for inviting me to speak on this subject. It's basically my central subject. It's like asking a Christian pastor to speak about the Bible. So, um, the Upanishads are arguably the central text of Hinduism. They are also arguably the most ancient, living, and if I may say so, most profound spiritual texts in all of world civilization. Um, the way these Upanishads came to the West is an interesting story, actually. Um, in India, the Mughal emperor, the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh, about 400 years ago, 400 to 500 years ago, he was Muslim, of course, but he was very interested in Hinduism and in the core texts of Hinduism. So he got it translated for the first time from the Vedic Sanskrit into Persian. And then years later, a Frenchman, Anquetil Duperron, who was interested in Zoroastrianism. At that time in Europe, there was a lot of searching for the original roots of Christianity and Judaism, and they had become aware of the Zoroastrian religion. And then they had become aware that a huge Zoroastrian diaspora existed in India. In India, they are known as the Parsis, coming from Persia and so on. So this young Frenchman, very intrepid and adventurous, because at that time the English and the French were fighting in India and across the world also for imperial reasons. So in the midst of this, he set sail for India, and his goal was not the Upanishads. He had not even heard about the Upanishads. He had no idea what they were. His goal was to recover an original copy of the Zend-Avesta, the core text of Zoroastrianism, which he did manage to do. But in the process, he also got other texts, and finally got a copy of the Persian translation of the Sanskrit Upanishads. And he got it back to France, and there he worked hard at it and published a Latin translation. Now look, from Vedic Sanskrit to a medieval Persian translation to a Latin translation by this young Frenchman in Paris. And that became the first published European version, non-Indian version of the Upanishads. It was called the Upanishad. And now it has a very interesting history. It fell into the hands of, for example, the great German thinker Schopenhauer. And he was so fascinated by it that he says, and I quote here, "There is no study in the world as beneficial as the study of this Upanishad, except perhaps the originals, the original Upanishads." And he goes on to say, "These Upanishads have been the solace of my life and will be the solace of my death." It spread to other European thinkers here in the United States long before Americans became aware of Hinduism, of Upanishads, long before Swami Vivekananda came to the United States and started teaching Vedanta. Emerson and Thoreau and Walt Whitman, they were studying the Upanishads. They were studying the Upanishads and other Hindu texts. And they were delighted and highly inspired by what they found. And all of them, Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, they were all deeply influenced. Even it went down later, even down to T.S. Eliot, for example. There are numerous references from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita in their works. So this is sort of the world history of the Upanishads. Um, I was reading this book on consciousness studies by Evan Thompson. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And he says the Upanishads are so central in the history of human thought that we would do well to date human history not as AD or BC, but before Upanishads and after Upanishads. Such a tremendous claim. And he says this present fascination with consciousness studies. Consciousness studies is not a new subject. It goes all the way back 5,000 years to the Gangetic plains and embodied in the texts called the Upanishads. So this is a little background about the importance of the Upanishads. In Hinduism, the central philosophy of Hinduism, in fact, it's called Vedanta. Vedas are the fundamental texts of Hinduism, and Anta means final or highest or the ultimate teachings of the Vedas. So Vedanta. But the Vedanta is Upanishads. I remember as a monastic novice, we had to memorize the definition of Vedanta, and the Sanskrit definition which we memorized went like this: Vedanta nama Upanishad pramanam. Vedanta is verily the source of spiritual knowledge called the Upanishads. The source of knowledge, literally, called the Upanishads. So, core texts of Hinduism, philosophically, the spiritual philosophy of Hinduism is Vedanta, and Vedanta is literally equivalent, textually equivalent to the Upanishads. What are these Upanishads? These are texts of various sizes embedded in the Vedas. So in the Vedas, which are again divided into 4 collections of books, if you actually look at them, and now there are translations, the first English translation was done right there where you're sitting in Oxford University. Max Muller, he translated the Vedas into English. If you look at those translations, you will find a lot of it, the bulk of it, is concerned with ritualism. So the kind of rituals that the ancient Hindus, the Vedic Hindus practiced were fire sacrifices. There would be elaborate fire altars which were constructed, and fire would be lit. There would be a group of priests who would chant Vedic mantras, the hymns from the Vedas, in accompaniment to offerings, often of clarified butter and other offerings. And the goal was that by this one accumulates merit, and those who do these sacrifices or those who sponsor these sacrifices, often they were elaborate and expensive affairs. So they get this merit, and the result would be, you have a pleasant life here, and you go to heaven hereafter, and you're assured of a good birth when you come back to the human life, because nothing lasts forever. Even the heavens and the hells, especially naughty, you would go to a variety of hells, but even those are limited by the extent of our naughtiness. So then you come back again to the human life. If you're an especially good boy or girl, you get to go to heaven, especially if you have done lots of Vedic rituals. You get to go to heaven, but those are also limited. And then you again come back to this human life. Then these texts are there, the Upanishads, which say there is something beyond heaven and hell. There's something beyond Vedic ritualism. That's the lower kind of religion. That's the kind of relative religion, which those who seek a pleasant life in this world and those who seek a pleasant afterlife, it's for them. But if for spiritually mature souls who want to know the secret of it all, who want the final release, who want lasting peace and fulfillment in life, not this endless cycle of births and deaths. I'm reminded of Swami Vivekananda, who came here and taught Vedanta, who came here and taught Upanishads. Imagine him coming to late 19th century America, here in New York, and saying this, how shocking it would have been for the largely Christian audience to hear. I have not come here to teach you how to go to heaven. I have come here to teach you how to stop going to heaven. That made complete sense from a Vedantic perspective or Vedic perspective, but I can see how utterly shocking it must have been to his Christian audience. So these Upanishads talk about moksha, which is the final liberation, which is the ending of this cycle of births and deaths, which is the attainment of the ultimate reality, attainment of peace and fulfillment, and so on. The ultimate goal in the Vedic scheme of things. So the Upanishads are concerned with moksha, with the higher spirituality. There is the word Upanishad itself, one interpretation by the great commentator Adi Shankaracharya about 1200, 1300 years ago, who gave the non-dualistic interpretation of the Upanishads. He gives an etymology, an analysis of the word Upanishad, which is a Sanskrit word, of course. So the etymological analysis is also very telling. It's very instructive. So he splits up the Upanishad, the word, into three parts. Upa, Ni, Sat. Easy enough. Upa, Ni, Sat. And then Upa in Sanskrit means proximity, near. So it means approaching these texts, or more precisely, approaching the knowledge embodied in these texts. Upa literally would mean sitting near. So often it would mean sitting near the master, the one who transmits this knowledge to us. So Upa would mean going to the master, and often in these texts you find students approaching the master and asking their questions, and the masters, who were called rishis, those who have seen the truth. So the Sanskrit derivation would be Rishaya Mantra Drashtaraha. The rishis are the seers of these mantras. So if you go to these masters and you literally sit near them, more symbolically approaching or being in proximity to this spiritual knowledge, that's the meaning of Upa. And the prefix Ni, it means in Sanskrit Nishchayena, which means with clarity, without any obscuration, without any doubt. So knowledge which is subject to doubt is no knowledge at all. The doubt-free, certain knowledge. So that is Ni. And then finally the root Sat. And then Shankaracharya gives three interpretations of that Sat. Visharana Gati Avasadana. What does it mean? One, it means that cutting the bonds of samsara, our limited existence, our conditioned existence, this cycle of births and deaths, which was sort of axiomatic to Indian culture. All Hindus, all Buddhists, all Jain, Sikhs, they all believe in this cycle of birth and death. And the Upanishads are actually the source of this kind of thinking. So cutting the bonds of samsara. Another one would be, the second meaning is gati. Gati means two meanings. One is taking you somewhere, going somewhere. So that which takes you to the ultimate reality, Brahman. Or another meaning of gati is understanding or realizing, that which makes us realize our true spiritual nature. So that's also Upanishad. And the third meaning was avasadana, which means a loosening, a weakening of the bonds of samsara. Even before the ultimate realization, as we go through the Upanishads, as we practice it, it's not an all or nothing thing. As we go through spiritual life, we get the benefits of spiritual life day to day. Life becomes more meaningful, we get more strength in life, we get more peace of mind, long before the final beatitude, for the final enlightenment, the final realization. So that's Upanishad for you. This is the etymological meaning of the word Upanishad. As far as how many texts, how many Upanishads are there? There are many. There is a very cute little Sanskrit verse. When we study the Upanishads, 10 Upanishads are prescribed for those who are Vedanta monks, or anybody who studies Vedanta. 10 Upanishads. The verse goes like this. Isha kena katha prashna mundamandukya titirihi aitareyam cha chandogyam brihadaranyakam tatha. So it's a list of 10 Upanishads. Isha Upanishad, Kena, Katha Upanishad, Prashna Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Aitariya Upanishad, Chandogya, and the Brihadaranyaka. Why these 10? Because there are many, many. These 10, one reason is these 10 were selected by the great commentator, sage, philosopher Adi Shankaracharya about, as I said, 1200 or 1300 years ago, to write his very profound and very landmark commentaries, explanations. And we owe a lot to these commentaries and the commentators. That's how we understand. These Upanishads are not only written in Sanskrit, they are written in a slightly obscure kind of Sanskrit, which is Vedic Sanskrit. And on top of that, because the subjects they deal with, they are so profound. So you have a very profound spiritual, philosophical subject written in an archaic Sanskrit, often elliptical in meaning. We need help. We need help. So we need, just a little aside here. I was in a class on the Upanishads, Introduction to the Upanishads, at Harvard University, at the Harvard Divinity School. And we used English translations. So at the end of the course, which was just 3 months, I remember one slightly puzzled looking lady, an American lady, saying, one might as well look at a UFO. What were these texts? I don't understand what they're going on and on about. So that's the problem of approaching the Upanishads directly in translation without context. It was a very interesting discussion I had with our teacher there, Professor Clooney. He said, at the root of the Protestant revolution against the Catholics, against the church, was the slogan sola scriptura. Sola scriptura means the scripture alone. Let's go directly to the Bible and not listen to what the fathers have to say in the Catholic Church. He's a Catholic priest, by the way. So he said, so that's how, you go straight to the text and let the text talk to you without explanations by the priests, And I said, look, that's a good approach. And it works beautifully for a text like, the Bible or the Dhammapada in Buddhism, or in Hinduism, indeed, the Bhagavad Gita. That speaks directly to us. You can more or less understand a lot of what's going on with just a good translation, not without any layers of interpretation. But it does not work for something like the Upanishads. The Upanishads are deeply embedded in a text. The Vedas, they're embedded in an ancient culture which modern Hinduism has evolved or changed far beyond. So you need context. You always need help in interpreting. You can't go directly to the Upanishad without a little bit of context. You don't have to go to the ancient commentators. You can go to a fairly good English explanation. But you need some help. Directly confronting the Upanishads is like being, as that lady said very, very honestly, it's like looking at a UFO. So 10 Upanishads. Some of them are very small. The Mandukya Upanishad is just 12 verses. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it's called very aptly the Great Forest. So it's literally a great forest. It's a huge, huge text with hundreds and hundreds of subsections. There are, on another list, there's an Upanishad called the Muktika Upanishad, not in these 10, which gives a list of 108 Upanishads, including these 10. So there are lots and lots of Upanishads. In fact, there's this story that Ramachandra, who is an incarnation of God, Hanuman, his greatest devotee. So Hanuman asks Ramachandra, how does one get liberation, enlightenment, freedom, moksha? And Ramachandra says, one text is enough. The Mandukya Upanishad, which is the shortest, the briefest of the Upanishads. One text is enough for those who seek liberation. And suppose you don't get liberation after studying and working with the Mandukya Upanishad, and then he gives the list of 108 Upanishad. So you better get liberation from the Mandukya Upanishad. If you don't, then the whole list is waiting for you. The whole syllabus is, the library is there waiting for you. All right. That's the background. One more point here before I go further ahead into what the Upanishads themselves teach, the core ideas. These Upanishads have given rise to modern Hinduism. So modern Hinduism is it has always been extremely diverse. There are many, many, many sects, many masters, many kinds of practices. I mean, if I've seen here in America now, there are many Hindu temples as you have in England. And so if a non-Hindu, especially if a Christian or a just not committed to any religion. If you suddenly go to a Hindu temple, it's bewildering. All these colorful deities and endless rituals. So what's going on there? So there are multiple sects of Hinduism. More or less, often you would find behind those sects, the underlying text would be the Upanishads. So there would be some school based on the Upanishads. And the multiple schools or multiple masters came and gave different translations, different commentaries, and based on these, the different schools have grown. Let me enumerate some of them. There is the Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual Vedanta, which I subscribe to, our particular organization, movement, our monastic organization. So we all follow the Vedanta societies, this non-dual Vedanta, primarily, not restrictively. It's more liberal and open, but this is one major interpretation. And a lot of people who have studied Vedanta, studied Hinduism, are actually familiar with, through texts and teachers, with this non-dual Vedanta. But I also want to flag here that there are multiple other schools of Vedanta. There is the Dvaita Vedanta, which is a dualistic Vedanta. There is the Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, which is can be translated as qualified monism. There is the Shuddha-Advaita, there is the Achintya Bheda Veda. I mean, just the translation of the terms also will speak to those who are philosophically trained. The term Achintya Bheda Veda translates into inconceivable identity in difference. Inconceivable identity in difference. And what all these differences are all about, these schools, they are all metaphysical differences. Somebody warned me when I left India and came to the West. He said, when you're going to speak in America or in the West, be careful of when you speak about dualism and non-dualism, because it means something quite different to, say, a Christian mind or a Jewish mind. The dualism of good and evil. So that's one kind of dualism. But here, when you're talking about, what we're talking about in Vedanta is a metaphysical dualism. Ultimate reality. How many kinds are there? So if you say God is a kind of reality, this world is another kind of reality, and we are a separate sentient beings like us, are a different kind of, distinct kind of reality, you would have dualistic Vedanta, where there is two and more. If you say all of them are part of the same reality, as organic unity of different realities, like the body is a part of hands and feet and head and so on, but it's one organic unity, then you have qualified monism, the Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. But if you say all differences are apparent, there is only one non-dual reality, then you have non-dual Vedanta. All these so-called differences which we are seeing are only we are seeing because of our ignorance. We do not know the truth. This is on the surface of things. The deeper truth is that there is one non-dual reality. All right, so these are the different schools of Vedanta. Let's go straight into the core texts of Vedanta. Oh yes, one more thing. If you ask for one text of Hinduism, one text of Vedanta, just tell us one. Obviously, it would be the Bhagavad Gita. Now, one might ask, what's the relationship between the Gita and the Upanishads? The Gita is basically a collection of the Upanishads. Krishna teaches Vedanta to Arjuna, the warrior Arjuna, and what he teaches is basically the Upanishads. Sometimes he actually quotes or adapts verses from the Upanishads, mantras from the Upanishads. So the Bhagavad Gita is sort of a practical, condensed teaching based on the Upanishads. Upanishads are par excellence the fundamental texts of Hinduism, the central texts of Vedanta. All right. Now I think I should stop beating about the bush and really start the spirit of the Upanishads. What's it all about? The Upanishads, the first thing that strikes you that these are dialogues. These are question answers. Often students go to masters and ask questions. And before we get to the answers, let's dwell just a little bit on the questions. The questions are so remarkable, are so profound. I mean, these are the central questions of humanity. Wherever you are, whoever you are, down to today, we are still asking those questions. So, questions like, who am I? What's there after death? What's the nature of this world? Is there an ultimate reality, God or whatever? These questions like this. And students go and ask the teachers. One question which you come across is, what's that one thing, if you know that, you know everything? And by the way, notice it's always questions, answers, teachings, knowing something. It's a knowledge system. What strikes you, it's not so much a belief system. Nobody's telling you, this is what it is. You need to believe this, subscribe to this. No, it's a knowledge system. And being knowledge, it's also remarkably impersonal. At no point are they talking to, quote unquote, Hindus, um, or even Vedic people. These are questions of human beings. At no point is either the teacher or the student saying that, oh, I need to belong to this sect or believe in God in this way, and then, be initiated into this, and then only this will work for me, these Upanishads. No, these are just very much like Socratic dialogues, questions about wisdom, about the greatest questions of human life. So one question, for example, which comes up again and again, what is that knowing which everything is known? Just to get a sample, a feel for the original language, let me chant from one of the Upanishads and give a free translation. It's nice to hear the original Vedic Sanskrit. So this is from the Mundaka Upanishad. Shaunako havai mahashalo angirasam vidivadupasanna papracha kasminno bhagavo vigyate sarvamidam vigyatam bhavati iti. Shaunaka, who's the student, he is described as being mahashala, as a person who owns or sponsors large elaborate fire sacrificial altars, which is a way of saying that this person must be, number one, a householder. These are the people who performed such rituals. A pious person who believed in the religion of the time, the Vedic fire sacrifices. And also, it goes without saying, a fairly rich and well-to-do person, who's got his life together. Otherwise, you wouldn't own many elaborate fire rituals. So it's a lot of implication there. Shaunaka, who is this man of the world, very competent, rich, well-to-do, everything is going probably well with him. He approaches the master Angiras and asks a question. And it says, Vidhivat, you approach as prescribed, with respect and with offerings. Just a little aside, the offerings you would usually take to these masters would include firewood. And why firewood? Because obviously, once again, Vedic fire rituals. So these masters lived in ashrams in the forests. And if you approach them for wisdom, you would offer them gifts which would be useful in their ashrams, including firewood. I remember explaining this in an ashram in Hollywood, not in Vedic times, but in 21st century in Hollywood a few years ago. And next day in the morning, lo and behold, when I opened my door early in the morning, there was a small bundle of firewood outside my door, tied with a ribbon, which some very devoted person must have left outside my door as an offering. So you approach with firewood to these masters and bow down to them and ask your question. And the question is, sir, what is that by knowing which everything here is known? Sarvam idam, everything that we experience in life. All of that is understood or realized by knowing one thing. I'll get to the answers, but some more questions. It's worth dwelling on the questions. A noted philosopher, Professor Arindam Chakravarti, he once excitedly called me on the phone and he said, we read these questions and we are eager to get on to the answers. Yes, I want to know the answers. But he said, let's stop with the questions. Let's stop first for a while, sit with the questions themselves. Let's make those questions ours and see the profundity of these questions and see that we are asking these questions even now. They are in modern forms, in more sophisticated forms in our modern language. They are the questions of science. They are the questions of philosophy. Oxford University Press, few years ago, if you could Google it, you'll find it. The 5 great unsolved questions in philosophy. I mean, it's sort of oxymoron. Most of the questions, important questions in philosophy, are bound to be unsolved. But anyway, 5 great unsolved questions in philosophy. If you look it up, you'll find 4 of the 5 deal with consciousness. 4 of the 5 great unsolved questions in philosophy, according to Oxford University Press today, deals with consciousness. And these are the questions which 5,000 years ago were being asked in the Upanishads. Often when you stop with the questions, you find we are still asking these questions, and you meditate on the questions, many of the answers emerge. And the answers also come with great force when we are firmly set in the questions, when they are our questions. So, what is that by knowing which everything is known? In the Chandogya Upanishad, very famous for maybe the one most well-known line from the Upanishads, Tat Tvamasi, that you are. That's in the Chandogya Upanishad, you are that. So that section, it comes in the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. There, the young man, Shvetaketu, who has been sent off to school, he comes back after maybe 12 years in school. He's graduated, he comes back, and his father sees him approaching from a distance. And by the way, sometimes these were masters, teachers who taught the students. Sometimes they were fathers teaching sons. There are a few women, you find them in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and elsewhere, who ask questions and who are also teachers. Now, this young man, Shvetaketu, comes back from school. His father looks at him and sees that the young man has become arrogant. I'm translating from the Upanishads. He's become puffed up by all the learning that he has got from school. So to teach him humility and to teach him wisdom, as his son comes back from school, the father asks, "Son, have they taught you in school, have your masters taught you that knowledge by knowing which everything is known?" See, the same question all over again. That knowledge by knowing which everything is known. Let's put this question aside, go on to some other questions. We'll circle back to all these questions later. Another question is a very famous, beautiful story from the Upanishads. Sometimes these Upanishads have stories. So one of the stories is of the little boy who went to the house of death. The little boy Nachiketa going to the house of death, Yama, the Lord of Death, where we all go after death. And he goes to the Lord of Death and asks him a question. What is the mystery of death? He says, you are the best authority on it. What really happens after death? Is there something left over after death? Some think that there is something left over after death. Something survives death. Some think that there is nothing after death. I would know the mystery of this. I would know the answer to this mystery. And he asks death. So it's an extraordinary setting. The little child asking this to the Lord of Death. All religions without exception, it's the one common feature of all religions. They all hold that there is something after death. If death is the complete end to everything, then there's no need of religion. It is just materialism. It's just plain, what is called materialistic reductionism. So all religions, in some sense, are spiritual in the sense that physical death is not the end. We have this person I know, she is Jewish. She said, "No, but Swami, that's not true of Judaism. There is nothing after death. Death is the end." I said, "You have to go and ask the rabbi." And then she comes back and says, "Oh, you're right. There's plenty of discussion of what happens after death and all this. We just don't stress it. We stress life here and now. But yes, there's a lot of discussion of after death." Now, moving on to another kind of question. What am I? Who am I? This is another great theme of the Upanishads. So the student in the Kena Upanishad asks the master, "Kene shitam padati preshitam mana, kena prana prathama preti yuktaha, kene shitam vacham imam vadanti, chakshu shrotram kaudeva yunakti." He asks the teacher, "Sir, what is it that makes this mind think? What is that bright being within us which impels speech? How am I speaking? what is giving me the experience of thinking? And how do I see? How do I hear? How do the senses work? Give us the experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. How do I have thoughts and feelings and emotions and ideas and memories? How do my motor organs, speech and all of these? And he uses the word Kaudeva, which shining being. So he's referring to consciousness, which is the one uniting factor behind all of this. This conscious first person experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And the difference between, say, here's this camera right now on my computer. This camera is taking pictures of me and sending it to you. You can see those pictures. But the way you are seeing it, the camera is not seeing me in that way. There is no internal, subjective, first-person experience within that camera or this computer. The way you are feeling, it's an internal experience which all of us have, the subjective experience of seeing. In fact, that's called life. What we call life is this series of subjective experiences. The feeling of seeing, color, smell, taste, touch, pain, pleasure, enjoyment, understanding, remembering, desiring, ego, waking, dreaming, sleeping, all of these. So, what is that light which lights up all these experiences? Thousands of years later, we now have the greatest problem in, I would say, all of science and philosophy, at least in the philosophy of mind, in neuroscience, in cognitive science, in AI, the problem of consciousness. Right now, at this time, at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, this is sort of the hottest subject in scientific discussions. What is consciousness? And the question has been framed almost exactly like this question asked 5,000 years ago by the student to the teacher in the Upanishad. What is it that gives us first-person experience? How can a physical thing like the brain have a subjective internal experience? This is called the hard problem of consciousness. So you can see the amazing nature of these questions. In different forms, we are still asking these questions. All right, let's now move on to some of the answers. Then we'll look at the experience, the practices, and the results of it all, and wrap it up. All right, the answers to these questions. Let's start with this. Let's start with the this question. Who am I? What am I? This is a favorite theme of the Upanishads. And in answer to this question, how do I see, hear, smell, taste, touch? How do I think? How do I speak? And the master gives an enigmatic reply, a direct reply, but an enigmatic reply. He says, Shrotrasya shrotram manaso mano yat vachoha vacha sau chakshusas chakshu atimritya pretya smad lokat atimrityu bhavami. I didn't get that quite right. Shrotrasya shrotram manaso mano yat chakshusas chakshur vacho hi vacham sa upranasya pranaha. So, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. The answer he gave was, you want to know how do the eyes see? How do the ears hear? How do you have the experience of speaking and thinking? He says, well, it is the ear of the ear. It is the eye of the eye. You know how you want to know how you get the experience of seeing? It is the eye of the eye. The experience of hearing, it is the ear of the ear. The experience of thinking, by now the student would have said, okay, I get it. It must be the mind of the mind. Now, and the master goes on to say, by realizing this, one transcends death here and now in this body, while living in this body. Now, indicating, this is a fascinating answer. Instead of directly saying, it is pure consciousness or Atman, Brahmans, he indicates the line of inquiry. The answer points out that behind all these diverse experiences we have of hearing, of seeing, of smelling, of tasting, touching, of thinking, remembering, there is one light behind all of them. It's like we have these diverse instruments. There's a fan, and there is a light, and there is a computer. They are all different, and they do different things. And they don't do anything when they're in the shop. But when you buy them and you install them and you plug them in, suddenly something gets into them. The fan goes round and round and gives us air, and the light shines, and the computer does so many remarkable things. So these instruments are all different. And there is, however, something common that gets into all of them and makes them do what they are designed to do. So here, for the first time, is this idea that consciousness is primary in all our experiences, apart from the biological instruments, the ears and the eyes and the nose, which are all different, apart from the physiological processes, apart from psychology. The mind, the intellect, memory, they are all processes, psychological processes. Apart from all of them, there is a fundamental reality which the teacher does not want to name. He calls it the ear of the ear, the eye of the eye, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, and so on. That one is distinct from all of these processes, and yet it pervades all of these processes, and it's like a light. The light metaphor comes again and again in the Upanishads. It's like a light, and it lights up all these processes. And it says that if you realize this, if you ascertain it for what it is, the result is amazing. You go beyond death. You go beyond limitation. And what is hidden here is that you are this light. This is the central teaching of the Upanishads, that you are that, Tattvamasi. It's not one more entity we have. I am the self, and then I have eyes and ears and mind, and plus I have something called consciousness. No. You are this one light, this one consciousness. That's what you truly are. If we go to the other question, we'll see how it all comes together. We go to the other question. What is that one thing by knowing which everything is known? To Shaunaka, our well-to-do man who owns many elaborate fire altars, the master replies. Remember the question now. What is it, sir, by knowing that I know everything? And the master replies, instead of directly, there's an indirect reply. Tasmai sahovacha dve vidye veditavye iti hasmayad brahma vido vadanti parachaiva paracha. To him, the master replied, knowledge is of two kinds. Instead of directly saying, what's that knowledge by knowing which I know everything? He says, first of all, knowledge is of two kinds. Thus we have heard from the knowers of Brahman. What are the two kinds? The supreme and the relative, the transcendent and the relative, the higher and the lower, the paravidya and aparavidya, the supreme knowledge and the relative knowledge. Now the question immediately arises. So what is this supreme knowledge and what is this relative knowledge? Distinguish between the two. And then the master goes on. Tatra para rigveda yajurveda samaveda atharvaveda shiksha kalpa vyakaranam niruktam chando jyotishamiti ataparayaya tadaksharam adhigamyate. Now, he says that, the lower knowledge, the relative knowledge, is the Rig Veda, is the Yajur Veda, is the Sama Veda, is the Atharva Veda. It is, in fact, sort of everything that was known at that time, just about all of knowledge. So he says it is Vedic phonetics, it is grammar, it's astronomy, it is the ritual, the procedures by which you do rituals, and so on. So all of this, in fact, whatever one would learn, all of that is lower knowledge. So basically the entire library, he puts it as lower knowledge, including the Vedas where these texts, the Upanishads are. That's all lower knowledge. Then what is this higher knowledge? What is this supreme knowledge, which he has demarcated, flagged? He says the parana, the higher knowledge, the supreme knowledge, is that by which the imperishable is known. He introduces the term akshara. The imperishable is realized, indicating thereby what you are asking me, O Shaunaka. You are not asking me a question about any existing branch of knowledge, what you normally consider knowledge. So I want you to keep this in mind. What you're asking me, there is an answer. There is something by knowing which you know everything. But that's not quite the way you think of knowledge. There's a different kind of knowledge altogether. More details you find when that arrogant young man, Shvetaketu, approaches the same question. He approaches his father, and his father asks him, "Did you learn that by knowing which everything is known?" And exactly the same question which Shaunaka had asked his master. So there you go a little deeper. What could this knowledge be? The knowing of the imperishable. How is it different from everything else? If you stay with the question, how can knowing something lead to the knowing of everything? After all, let me clarify. If I know botany, I know lots of things about plants, but I don't know anything about quarks and quasars. I don't know anything about calculus. If you know mathematics, you know you can do lots of sums. You know different varieties and branches of mathematics. But you don't know much about psychology, maybe. So how is it that knowing one thing can lead to knowledge of everything? And is it at all possible? What kind of knowledge could that be? And the Upanishad now points out that, if you know the material cause of something, the material out of which things are made, then you know those things. The way the Upanishad points it out is, by knowing one lump of clay, one knows anything that the potter might make out of that clay. The varieties of jars and pots and all the elaborate designs on different kinds of pottery. And there are a lot of pot and clay examples will come up in the Upanishads. One reason being, I think that was ubiquitous. I mean, if you ever go to and dig up an ancient civilization anywhere in the world, the first thing that you find is broken pottery. So, as by knowing one lump of clay, one knows all the pottery that can be made out of it. The potter might devise out of that lump of clay. What would one know in that case? Whatever you make out of that lump of clay, whatever the design of the pot or the jar you make, one thing is certain: it is clay, and it is that clay. That clay which you saw as this lump is now appearing as this beautiful jar or pot. Indicating thereby is drawing our attention to the basic reality, the ontological reality, the metaphysical reality of it all, quite apart from the name, the form, and the use. In Sanskrit, we say nama rupa vyavahara. You have something of this shape, we call it and you give it a name, pot. And then you can put water in it, which you can't do, or you can you can put a nice flowering plant in it, which you can't do for a lump of clay. So now you have the same clay, but it has a new shape, it has a new name, and it has multiple new uses. But what the Upanishad wants us to say is that it's literally the same substance, the same reality. How do you know that? It says that suppose you take the clay away. It says, keep your precious pot, give my clay back. You can't. Because it's that very clay which has been shaped into this new entity, which you're giving a new name, using in new ways, and looks different. It looks different, it's named differently, it's used differently, but the Upanishad points out it continues to be verily the same clay. And then it gives multiple other similar examples. Just as all the various iron implements are known if you know what iron is. Just as all the golden ornaments are known if you know what gold is. Whether it's a necklace, whether it is a tiara, whether it's a ring or a bracelet, it's just that same lump of gold or the bar of gold which we had initially to begin with. It's exactly that, materially speaking. The mass is that, the weight is that. So, all right, I got it. So, what gives? What is that which is common to everything in this universe? And then the master tells us that there is one thing, like gold in all golden ornaments, like iron in all iron implements, like clay in all kinds of clay pots. There is one thing which is common to this entire universe, and that is existence itself, being itself. This concept 5,000 years ago, they are talking about absolute existence, and they use the term Sat, which means truth, reality, or being. And the master says, Sadeva Samya Idamagra Asid Ekam Eva Dvitiyam. My dear child, my dear son, all this indeed to begin with was being itself, existence itself, one without a second, one alone without a second. And all that has happened since then till now is names and forms and uses have been appearing and disappearing. That same being appears around all of you. So we use language like, this table exists and the chair exists and the man exists and the woman exists and the sky exists and the earth exists. But this teacher, the Upanishads, would have us use a new kind of language. Existence tables, existence chairs, existence skies or earths, or I'm mutilating the language, but there is being alone. And it is appearing in all these various names and forms and behaviors. So name, form, and behavior keeps changing, but this underlying existence is the same. You can still think of the kid, Shwetaketu, shrugging, okay, sounds cool. What does that have to do with me? And then the hammer blow, the stunning declaration. His father says, Tat Sat, Tat Tvamasi, Tat Sat, Tat Tvamasi, Shwetaketu. That one non-dual being, yes, you are that. So here is bringing who am I and the reality of the universe into an equation. This is the famous Vedantic or Upanishadic equation of Atman is equal to Brahman. Atman, our real nature. Brahman, the nature of this universe, is one and the same. Atman, our real nature, as we saw in the Kena Upanishad, that one light which lights up all our experiences. And Brahman, the one non-dual existence which appears as this universe. This consciousness and this being or existence, in Sanskrit, this chit and this sat, they are one and the same thing. Existence is consciousness, consciousness is existence in this Upanishadic worldview. Another way of putting this, and I'll just give another example, couple of more examples and stop. One is from the shortest of the Upanishads which I mentioned, the Mandukya Upanishad, which is just 12 mantras, which is the one you need to study to become enlightened. If you don't get enlightened, you're threatened with 108 Upanishads. But in that Upanishad, it's a brilliant analysis of our ubiquitous experience, our quotidian experience, daily experience of waking, dreaming, sleeping. What is our experience of life? Well, here I am, and I see, hear, smell, taste, touch. I think, I enjoy, I suffer, I remember, I do things in life, and I get by. I'm born and I die. All of this is called in the Mandukya, this is your waking experience. You are the waker, and this is the waking world. Okay, what else? Well, you do fall asleep. At one time, this waking world disappears from your experience. This waking body, the way body you have right now, this disappears from your experience, your subjective experience. As we fall asleep, a world of dreams emerges. We don't know we are dreaming. It seems like waking. So we find that just like the waking world, there are people, and I am also there. It's only much later after waking up I realize that, that the whole thing was a dream produced by my mind. So there's the world of dreams, and you are there. You are also that person in the dream experiencing a dream world, which you realize only after waking up. And there's a third kind of experience which we all have, which is deep sleep, which is a mysterious kind of state where we do not experience the world. You're not awake. We are not even dreaming. It's just blank. In the English phrase, I slept like a log. I didn't know anything. I slept like a log. And similar phrases are there in every language of the world, showing the commonality of this deep sleep experience. Because Vedanta does not say that deep sleep is an absence of experience. Vedanta holds, the Upanishads hold, that deep sleep is very much an experience. It's an experience of absence. Suppose there is nothing to experience, nothing to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, nothing to think about, nothing to remember, memory has stopped. Even the sense of ego has disappeared, nothing to understand, just nothing. But that nothing is also presented to you, the consciousness. And that's the deep sleep experience. So that's the third kind of experience we have. And these three, waking, dreaming, and sleeping, this is how our days pass. This rotates in the days of our lives and months and years, waking, dreaming, sleeping. Now, the Mandukya Upanishad says, up to this, common experience. So the Upanishads have this remarkable way of teaching. First of all, they start where we are, just the way we experience life, and then takes us to something incredible. Now the Mandukya Upanishad says all three are appearing and disappearing in one consciousness. There is one underlying consciousness in which all three are appearing and disappearing. And that the Upanishad calls the fourth. Why the fourth? Because waker, you the waker, call yourself number one. You the dreamer, call yourself number two. So the deep sleeper is number three. With respect to these three, which we all know about, this is common. The Upanishad doesn't really have to teach us. Often people talk about the Mandukya Upanishad, which is about the three states of waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Well, it's not really about the three states. It's using the three states to point out something that's beyond the three states, illumining the three states, making all three states possible. And that's again that one light, which we found in the Kena Upanishad, which lights up all our experiences. That the Upanishad calls the fourth. And it says that it's actually not the fourth, it is the one, which appears as the three, waker, dreamer, deep sleeper. But the Upanishad says, it's not just the waker, dreamer, deep sleeper. You, the waker, and your entire waking world. You, the dreamer, and your entire dream worlds. You, the deep sleeper, and your entire potential seed state of the deep sleep. All of them are appearances in one consciousness. That means this vast, we are not like a pinprick of consciousness, like a little glimmering light in a vast, uncaring world. Rather, this so-called vast world of waking and then dreams and deep sleep, but especially this so-called seemingly hard, solid world which seems outside us. The Upanishad claims it's not outside you. What you think of yourself and your world both are inside or appearing in the real you. The one consciousness in which you, the subject, and your objective universe are appearing, shining, and disappearing back again. So this is the Mandukya Upanishad. And then, all right, if there's some time in Q&A, I'll give some more examples. A couple of mentions of practices and results. What is the result of all of this? The Upanishads are unanimous in saying, takes you beyond death, takes you beyond suffering. Once you realize what you truly are, that you are this Atman, that you are this Brahman, this pure being, pure consciousness, which is the reality of this body and mind, which is the reality of this entire universe. This is not born, this does not die. Bodies are born, bodies age, bodies die. It is as nothing to you, this limitless awareness. Millions of bodies have come and aged and gone. You are still here. According to the Upanishadic worldview, even universes have arisen and disappeared. You are still here. They have arisen and disappeared in you. So you are beyond death. Death holds no fear for you anymore. That's the big one. But also, even while living, our attention is drawn to the fact that hunger and thirst, pain and pleasure, they pertain to the body and to the mind, but not to awareness itself. It's not awareness which is feeling annoyed. Annoyance is in the mind. It's not awareness which is feeling furious or sad. It's not awareness which is even in pain. This is a very subtle distinction. Nowadays in hospitals, in the United States, I think in UK also, they've introduced this pain measurement. When you go to the hospital, they will ask you, how much on a scale of 1 to 10 does it hurt? Now, you need awareness to tell that I am aware of pain. But the Vedanta immediately says, if you're aware of something, that what you are aware of is an object to you, is a thing to you. Just like this envelope is a thing to me. I'm aware of it. That doesn't mean I'm an envelope. It's something appearing in me, the consciousness. Similarly, pain, if you pinch yourself, that's also a thing which appears in you, the consciousness. Just as consciousness is not an envelope, consciousness is also not pain or pleasure. It's like the light which lights up everything that appears before it. It is that pure being which gives existence to everything that draws existence from it. So you transcend as awareness pain and pleasure, annoyance and guilt and envy and terror and all of that, waking and dreaming and sleeping. Meditative mind and restless mind, peaceful mind and restless mind. That's meditation and that's restlessness. You, the awareness, are constantly at peace. Now, that is a choiceless awareness and it's a choiceless peace. You can't even disturb it. I'm always reminded of the Bible, the peace that passeth understanding. In the Upanishadic scheme of things, it's literally true. Understanding is intellect. The peace that passeth understanding is pure awareness of pure being, which you are. So when we realize it, we transcend every problem in life. It's not escapism because the problems will not go away. Problems at the level of the body, at the level of society, at the level of community, at the level of the mind, you have to deal with them as best as you can. But know at the deepest level, you, I, and everybody else are actually safe from, you transcend this show of life. And in fact, you make it possible. You make it possible, and you, at the same time, you are the ground of this universe, you're the ground of life itself, and you are safe from its vagaries. This liberation, not just after death, but here and now, living in this life. Okay, one more point. So how do we get this? This sounds nice, sounds, as Americans would say, it sounds cool. How do you actually attain to this? And the Upanishads say, Shrotavya, Mantavya, Nididhyasitavya. Very straightforward. Just like any kind of knowledge, you hear, you reason about it, and you meditate upon it. Here, Shravana. There's, of course, obviously much more to it than that. Each of these things needs explanation. But basically, it's true. You listen to these teachings. You pay attention to what is being said. After all, what is being said is about you. So in one sense, these Upanishads, is far from being an ancient and dry and abstract philosophy, is extremely interesting because it's about the most interesting subject in our lives. I, me, mine. I, me, myself. So it's literally about you and about nothing else other than you. You listen to it carefully, again and again. That's why we have so many Upanishads and so many texts based on the Upanishads. But then one must try to understand it. This is a method of knowledge par excellence. Here, the requirement is not to believe. If you believe in what the Upanishad is saying, that's great, but it's not enough. It's not like, it's a bit like if you go to university, Oxford or Cambridge or somewhere, and you attend a class in mathematics and your professor says, do you get it? And you say, I don't, but I believe you. You are great, sir. I believe you. The professor would be exasperated. That's all right, but you have to get what I'm saying or what I'm teaching. The Upanishad is exactly like that. To get that, we must question. It is one system which is not only not afraid of questioning, one religious system which is not afraid of questioning, in fact, welcomes it from its most abstruse texts, the most original, oldest texts, down to 2,000-3,000 years of tradition. So many texts, so many questions. So as many questions as you can think. I remember in the beginning of my study, I was asking one of my teachers, a senior monk. I tentatively, I said, I have a question. I was afraid of offending him. I have a question, sir, can I ask you? And he said to me, this was about nearly 30 years ago. I still remember it so clearly. He said to me, looking at me with a smile, he said, ask away. Better minds than yours have asked questions for thousands of years and have been satisfied with answers. So don't think that if you ask a couple of questions, the whole structure of the Upanishads and Vedanta will come tumbling down because of your questions. Ask away. Ask to your heart's content. So reasoning, that's the second stage. And then finally, meditation. There is something called non-dual meditation or Vedantic meditation. What do they do, these three stages? Stage one, hearing. By hearing or studying, we get the information. We know what these Upanishads are teaching us. At the end of hearing, we can say, okay, I get it. This is what the Upanishads are telling me. But then the problem is, I don't understand it. I have many questions. You might be like that lady in the class who said, looks like a UFO. Yes, I've read the book, but I don't understand it. I have so many questions. Then you come to second stage, the reasoning, questioning, reasoning, arguing. And that stage is complete when you can say, okay, now I know the teachings, but now I also understand the teachings. I get it. I'm ready to teach the class out of my way. I can give a talk on the Upanishads and explain it to you also. I can answer your questions too. So I get it. I have clarity, I have conviction. What remains? Well, one might still complain at this point that, okay, I get it, but I still am the same guy, as the Americans would say. You're still the same dude. So I'm still the same person. I don't particularly feel that I am Atman, Brahman, pure consciousness. I don't have any, brilliant spiritual experience. It just feels like I've learned a particularly clever philosophy, a very nice philosophy. So to make it a living realization, what Vivekananda called assimilation of this. So then there is a whole process of Vedantic meditation. When this is completed, one can not only say, I know what the Upanishads teach, I understand what the Upanishads teach, but I can also say, it's real for me now. I can honestly say that I am Brahman, that you are, this is a true statement for me now. And that's called living liberation. Thank you so much. We have a little bit of time left over for questions, I think. Thank you so much for giving me such a patient hearing.